The Bar Kokhba revolt, also known as the Third Jewish-Roman War, was a pivotal uprising that occurred in Judea during the 2nd century AD. Sparked by Roman oppression and religious suppression, the revolt erupted in 132 under the leadership of Simon Bar Kokhba, a charismatic figure who rallied the Judean population against Roman rule. And today, that's what we're here to discuss. Hello and welcome to the channel. If you're new, it's good to meet you, and if you are coming back, it's a pleasure to have you with me again. If you'd like to support the channel, then please follow the links to the Patreon. And if you'd like to support in other ways, liking, commenting, and subscribing helps YouTube push my videos out to more people. Now, without further ado, get yourself relaxed while we settle in and talk about the Jewish-Roman Wars, Part 2. If you've not seen the first video, you may find the link in the description discussing the first Roman-Jewish revolts. Now, before we talk about the Bar Kokhba revolt, we have to set the scene with the Kitos War. So let's do that first, shall we? Throughout the 1st century CE, tensions between the Jewish population of the Roman Empire and the broader Greek and Roman communities steadily saw an increase. These escalations were marked by various violent incidents, primarily occurring in Judea, where segments of the Judean populace sporadically rebelled against their Roman rulers. Additionally, notable events unfolded in other regions of the empire, such as the infamous Alexandria pogroms, which targeted the sizable Jewish community in the Roman province of Egypt. Despite these challenges, the Jewish diaspora generally thrived across the Roman Empire, with the notable exception of Alexandria. In many instances, the Jews relied on Roman authorities to safeguard their rights and interests within the imperial framework. Now, just quickly, to talk about the First Roman-Jewish War. The culmination of mounting tensions first began in 66 CE. It was initially sparked by the religious and cultural differences between the Greek and Jewish populations. The conflict escalated due to anti-tax protests and violent acts against Roman citizens. As hostilities intensified, the Roman military garrison in Judea itself found itself overwhelmed by the rebel forces, prompting the flight of the pro-Roman king Herod Agrippa II and other officials to the region of Galilee. In response, Cestius Gallus, the legate of Syria, dispatched the Syrian army, including 12th Fulminata Legion and auxiliary troops, to quell the uprising. However, the legion suffered a rather surprising defeat at the hands of Jewish rebels in the Battle of Beth Horon, which sent quite a shock through the Roman leadership. Following this setback, the task of suppressing the revolt was entrusted to General Vespasian and his son Titus. They assumed 4 legions and commenced a systematic campaign beginning in Galilee in 67. The war culminated with the siege and eventual destruction of the rebel stronghold in Jerusalem in 70 AD by legions under the command of Titus. Subsequent operations resulted in the defeat of remaining Jewish strongholds, marking the end of the First Rebellion. Once more, if you want more detail, including some rather gory and macabre aspects, I refer you to the first video. Now, moving forward a little more, In 115 AD, Emperor Trajan was leading a military campaign against the Parthians in the eastern region. The Roman intervention was triggered by the Parthians installing a pro-Parthian ruler in the Kingdom of Armenia, a territory traditionally within the Roman sphere of influence. This move, which naturally violated the established balance of power, inevitably led to a conflict. As Trajan's forces marched triumphantly through Mesopotamia, Jewish insurgents in the rear began launching attacks on the small Roman garrisons that were left behind. Simultaneously, a rebellion erupted in the distant Cyrenaica, which quickly spread to Egypt and Cyprus, igniting unrest back in Judea. The uprising, centered in Lydda, posed a threat to the vital grain supply route from Egypt to the front line. The rebellion rapidly extended to recently conquered provinces, with cities boasting significant Jewish populations such as Nisibis, Edessa, Seleucia, and Arbela, which is now the modern city of Erbil in Iraq, who joined the revolt and massacring their small Roman garrisons. The Romans, unfortunately, did not stand a chance against the hordes of rebels with whatever weapons they could summon up. In Cyrenaica, a leader known as Lucaus or Andreas, who had declared himself king, led the rebellion, according to Eusebius of Caesarea. His followers destroyed numerous temples, including those dedicated to Hecate, Jupiter, Apollo, and Artemis, as well as key Roman symbols such as the Caesareum, the Basilica, and even the public baths. The Christian historian Orosius from the 4th century documented that the violence devastated Cyrenaica to such an extent that the Emperor Hadrian had to establish new colonies in an attempt to repopulate the region. Let's hear from Orosius now. He says, "The Jews waged war on their inhabitants throughout Libya in the most savage fashion, and to such an extent that the country wasted, that its cultivators had been slain, its land would have been remained utterly depopulated, had not Emperor Hadrian gathered settlers from other places and sent them thither, for the inhabitants had been wiped out." Now, to the situation in Egypt. Lucaus led the rebels to Alexandria, where they entered the city after it was abandoned by the Roman governor Marcus Rutilius Lupus. Once they entered it, they set it on fire. Egyptian temples and the tomb of Pompey were completely destroyed. The Jewish rebels also achieved victory in a battle of Hermopolis in 116, as evidenced by Egyptian papyrus records. Trajan dispatched new troops under the Praefectus Praetorio Marcius Turbo, but it was not until autumn 117 that Egypt and Cyrenaica were completely pacified. And now to Cyprus. In Cyprus, a Jewish group led by Artemion seized control of the island and massacred tens of thousands of Cypriot Greek civilians. Remember, civilians, not fighters, not guards, civilians. During the major uprising against the Romans under Trajan in 117, Cypriot Jews joined in and, according to Dio, they slaughtered 240,000 Greeks. A Roman army was sent to reclaim the capital, and after the rebellion was completely quelled, laws were enacted banning any Jews from residing on the island. This prohibition extended to the extent that Jewish survivors of shipwrecks were punished for seeking refuge on Cypriot shores. Talk about harboring a grudge, but can you blame them? In Mesopotamia, a fresh rebellion erupted while Trajan was in the Persian Gulf. Trajan successfully recaptured Nisibis, modern-day Nusaybin in Turkey, Edessa, the capital of Osroene, and Seleucia, which is located in present-day Iraq, all of which harbored very significant Jewish communities. As part of Trajan's entourage, a pro-Roman son of the Parthian king Osroes I, Parthamaspatus, was brought on the expedition. Trajan crowned him as the king of the Parthians in Ctesiphon. The ceremony is described in a source by Cassius Dio, where Trajan elevated Parthamaspates to the throne and adorned him with the diadem, fearing potential Parthian revolt. The Romans had had quite a lot of trouble with the Parthians in previous times, and would have more trouble with them in times later on. But that's for the Parthians video. Now Trajan, after this, then headed north to personally oversee the ongoing siege of Hatra. The siege persisted throughout the summer of 117, but Trajan's health, weakened by years of campaigning in the scorching eastern climate, began to deteriorate. Opting to return to Rome to recuperate, Trajan sailed from Seleucia. However, his condition began to worsen, and it was worsening rapidly, leading to his death upon reaching Selinus in Cilicia. Shortly after, Hadrian succeeded him as emperor. Now back in Judea, the Jewish leader Lucius sought refuge after fleeing from Cyrenaica. Marcius Turbo, pursuing him, executed Julian and Pappus, prominent leaders of the rebellion. Lucius Quietus, having conquered the Jews in Mesopotamia, assumed command of the Roman army in Judea and besieged Lydda, where rebel Jews had gathered under Julian and Pappus. The situation became increasingly dire, with the renowned patriarch Rabban Gamaliel II allowing fasting even during Hanukkah. Other rabbis disapproved of this measure. Now, following the capture of Lydda, many Jews were put to death, with the slain of Lydda being remembered with reverence in the Talmud. The rebel leaders, Pappus and Julian, were among those executed, becoming martyrs among the Jews. Just ask any Jew, he'll tell you. Lucius Quietus, once esteemed by Trajan, lost his command following Hadrian's accession and was later killed under unknown circumstances, possibly on Hadrian's orders in the summer of 118. Hadrian opted to end the conflict, abandoning several of Trajan's eastern conquests to stabilize the eastern borders. And despite relinquishing control over Mesopotamia, he installed Parthamaspates as the king of a restored Osroene. Osroene would remain a buffer state between the two empires for the next century. Back in Judea, tensions persisted, and this prompted the Romans, under Hadrian's directive, to station the Legio Six Ferrata permanently in Caesarea Maritima. They knew the fight was definitely not over yet. Which leads us to the year 130. Significant developments unfolded in the province of Judea when Hadrian embarked on a visit to the eastern Mediterranean. According to Cassius Dio, during his visit, Hadrian made the pivotal choice to rebuild the devastated city of Jerusalem as the Holy Roman colony of Aelia Capitolinia, naming after himself. This decision, coupled with Hadrian's imposition of other restrictions on the Jewish population, purportedly fueled the outbreak of the 132 Bar Kokhba rebellion. This revolt, marked by extreme violence, stretched the Roman military capabilities to their limits. And we finally arrive at the main topic. Pardon such a build-up, but you really must understand the background that led to this, where the Judeans find themselves, and why they were revolting. Now, let's talk about the Bar Kokhba revolt. Jewish leaders meticulously strategized the second revolt to rectify the numerous errors that marred the first Jewish-Roman war 6 decades earlier. In 132, the uprising, spearheaded by Simon Bar Kokhba and Eleazar, swiftly spread from Modi'in across the region, effectively isolating the Roman garrison inside Jerusalem. Although Rufus initially led the rebellion, his disappearance from historical records after 132 remains a little bit of a mystery. While following the outbreak of the revolt, Bar Kokhba's insurgents dealt significant blows to Legio X Fretensis, stationed in Aelia Capitolina, which was another name for Jerusalem. With Legio X and Legio VI unable to quell the rebellion, reinforcements were urgently dispatched from nearby provinces. Gaius Publicius Marcellus, the legate of Roman Syria, arrived with Legio III Gallica, while Titus Heternius Nepos, the governor of Roman Arabia, brought Legio III Cyrenaica. Some historians suggest that Legio XXII Deatoriana was also dispatched from Arabia Petraea, but met its demise in an ambush en route to Aelia Capitolina, potentially leading to its disbandment. Additionally, Legio II Traiana Fortis, previously stationed in Egypt, likely arrived in Judea during this phase. According to rabbinic sources, Bar Kokhba commanded around 400,000 men at the rebellion's peak. The sudden outbreak and initial success of the revolt caught the Romans off guard. Employing a combination of tactics, the rebels primarily engaged in guerrilla warfare, inflicting heavy casualties on the Roman army. This perspective finds support in Cassius Dio's account, suggesting that the revolt commenced with covert assaults aligned with the preparation of hideout systems. However, after seizing control of fortresses, Bar Kokhba shifted to direct engagement, leveraging his numerical superiority. Simon Bar Kokhba assumed the title Nasi Israel, and governed over a quasi-independent entity named Israel for more than 2.5 years. Rabbi Akiva, a prominent Jewish sage and spiritual leader of the revolt, hailed Simon Bar Kokhba as the Jewish Messiah and bestowed upon him the Aramaic patronymic Bar Kokhba, signifying son of a star, alluding to the star prophecy in Numbers 24:17, that being a star rises from Jacob. Now, although the name Bar Kokhba is not found in the Talmud, it appears in ecclesiastical sources. The era of Israel's redemption was proclaimed, contracts were formalized, and a significant quantity of Bar Kokhba revolt coinage was minted over foreign coins. Well, as the Roman army advanced slowly, severing supply lines, the rebels resorted to prolonged defensive strategies. The defense infrastructure of Judean towns and villages primarily relied on extensive networks of hideout caves, constructed in abundance across almost every populated area. Many households utilized subterranean hideouts, where Judean insurgents sought to withstand the Roman supremacy by exploiting the narrow passages and even launching ambushes from underground. These cave systems, often interconnected, served not only as shelters for the rebels, but also for storing provisions and offering refuge to their families. Hideout systems were extensively deployed in the Judean hills, the deserts, northern Negev, and to a lesser extent in Galilee, Samaria, and the Jordan Valley. In fact, as of 2015, approximately 350 hideout systems have been documented within the remains of 140 Jewish villages. After facing a series of setbacks, Hadrian summoned his general, Sextus Julius Severus, from Britannia, and troops were mobilized from as far away as the Danube. In the winter of 133 to 34, Severus arrived in Judea with a formidable army, comprising of 3 legions from Europe, as well as cohorts from additional legions of between 30 and 50 auxiliary units. The size of the Roman force assembled against the rebels far surpassed that commanded by Titus 60 years earlier. Nearly 1/3 of the entire Roman army participated in the campaign against Bar Kokhba. That just goes to show how much was at stake. It is estimated that forces from at least 10 legions were involved in Severus's campaign in Judea, along with 30 or 40 of those extra units. It pretty much totaled up to about 60,000, or perhaps even as far as 120,000 with all the auxiliaries involved. Now that's quite a formidable force. And by the way, there is speculation that Legio IX Hispana was among the legions Severus brought from Europe, and its disappearance during the 2nd century is often linked to this war. According to some interpretations, one of the pivotal battles in the conflict occurred near Tel Shalem in the Beat Shean Valley, adjacent to what is now identified as the legionary camp Legio VI Ferrata. This theory suggests a significant expansion on the rebels' reach, potentially encompassing the northern valleys in addition to Galilee. Archaeological discoveries at Tel Shalem include remnants of a triumphal arch dedicated to Emperor Hadrian. It provides evidence that supports this interpretation. Also, Findings such as a bust of Emperor Hadrian specifically tie the site to this period, reinforcing the theory of a major, decisive battle at Tel Shalem. Simon Bar Kokhba designated Herodium as his secondary headquarters, with Yeshua ben Galgula likely serving as his second or third in command. Findings across the site provide evidence for this revolt, from external structures to the intricate water system beneath the mountain. Now, it leads us into the final phase of these revolts, where the Romans began to get the upper hand. Bar Kokhba began to experience a loss of territorial control, except for the vicinity of the Betar fortress, where he made his last stand against the Romans. Well, following the loss of many strongholds, Bar Kokhba and his remaining forces retreated to that fortress of Betar, which came under siege in the summer of 135. Legio 5 Macedonica and Legio 11 Claudia are reported to have participated in this siege. Now, according to Jewish tradition, the fortress fell and was destroyed on the fast of Tisha B'Av, a day of mourning for the destruction of the first and second Jewish temples. Salt in the wound, perhaps. Rabbinical accounts attribute the defeat to Bar Kokhba's suspicion of his maternal uncle, Rabbi Elazar Hammodai, whom he allegedly killed for suspected collaboration with the enemy, thereby forfeiting his divine protection. The aftermath of Betar's capture is described as a massacre in the historical sources that we have. The Jerusalem Talmud records that the death toll in Betar was staggering, with the Romans reportedly continuing to slaughter until their horses were submerged in blood up to their nostrils. Perhaps they've taken a little bit of poetic license with that, but you get the point. There was an inordinate amount of killing. Now, according to a rabbinic midrash, 8 prominent members of the Sanhedrin were executed by the Romans. That was Rabbi Akiva, Hanina bin Teradion, Rabbi Huspith, Elazar bin Shemamua, Hanina ben Hakanai, Jeshbab the scribe, Judah ben Dama, and Judah ben Bava, all gone in the same day. Now, the exact date of Akiva's execution is debated, with some place it at the outset of the revolt based on the Midrash, while others connect it to the later stages. Either way, the rabbinic narrative depicts excruciating tortures. Akiva was flayed with iron combs. Ishmael had his scalp slowly taken off, and Hanina was burned at the stake with wet wool and a Torah scroll wrapped around his body to prolong the suffering. Certainly not a good way to go. But what about Bar Kokhba? Well, his fate remains a little uncertain, with Babylonian Talmud traditions suggesting that he died from a snake bite or natural causes during the Roman siege, or possibly by order of the Sanhedrin as a false messiah. Lamentations Rabbah mentions that Bar Kokhba's head was presented to Emperor Hadrian after the siege of Betar. Now, after the fall of the city, the Roman forces engaged in their systematic killings, systematically destroying all of the remaining Jewish villages and hunting down any refugees they could find. Legio III Cyrenaica played a significant role in this final phase of the campaign. And yes, it was a very brutal phase, but it was a kind of brutality that was matched by what they got. Everybody was as ruthless as the next. Well, historians hold differing views on the duration of the Roman campaign post-fall of Betar. Some argue that the further resistance was very swiftly crushed, while others suggest that pockets of Jewish rebellion continued to evade capture with their families into late 135 and possibly even the spring of the following year. However, whichever way it really is, it's clear that by early 136 that the revolt had been well and truly quelled. Cassius Dio noted that, and I quote, "Many Romans, moreover, perished in this war. Therefore, Hadrian, in writing to the Senate, did not employ the opening phrase commonly affected by the emperor. If you and your children are in health, it is well, and the army are in health." Some scholars argue that the unusually high number of preserved Roman veteran diplomas from the 150s and 60s suggest a significant conscription effort across the Roman Empire to replenish heavy losses within military legions and auxiliary units between 133 and 35, corresponding to the revolt. And as previously mentioned, 12th Deuteronia may have been disbanded due to such severe losses. Additionally, some historians propose that the disbandment of Legio IX Hispana in the mid-2nd century could be linked to this war. Previously, it was widely believed that the Ninth had vanished around 108 CE, possibly meeting its end in Britain. However, archaeological discoveries from the mid-2010s in Nijmegen, dating to 121 CE, revealed inscriptions of 2 senior officers who actually served in the Ninth around 120 CE and continued to hold prominent roles for several decades. This led to the conclusion that the legion was disbanded between 120 and 197, either due to its involvement in the Bar Kokhba revolt, conflicts in Cappadocia, or perhaps operations along the Danube in 162. Well, let's have a little bit of retrospect. What was the aftermath? Well, the revolt had devastating repercussions for the Jewish population in Judea, resulting in extensive loss of life, widespread displacement, and rampant enslavement. The scale of the suffering exceeded that of the aftermath of the First Jewish-Roman War, leaving central Judea in a state of utter desolation. Some scholars characterize these consequences as an act of genocide. Jewish religious and political authority faced harsher suppression, and the province of Judea was renamed Syria Palestina. Casualties and widespread destruction. According to Roman historian Cassius Dio, I quote, 50 of the most important outposts and 985 of their most famous villages were razed to the ground. 580,000 men were slain in the various raids and battles, and the number of those that perished by famine, disease, and fire was past finding out. Thus, nearly the whole of Judea was made desolate. That's from Cassius Dio's History of Rome, section 6914. And it's probably true, because excavations reveal that every village in the region of Judea had been destroyed in the revolt. Most Roman period settlements in Judea show layers of destruction or abandonment, suggesting that Jewish settlement had been almost entirely wiped out by the end of the revolt. Now, of course, it is suggested by some modern observers that Dio had exaggerated some numbers. However, a lot of people think that they're highly plausible, given accurate Roman census declarations. Well, either way, it wasn't just Judea. Jews were expelled from Jerusalem and various other districts, including Gophna, Herodion, and Akraba. Post-revolt Judea, though, saw the replacement of the departing Jewish population with a mixed populace, consisting of Roman veterans and immigrants from the western parts of the empire. These settlers occupied areas such as Aelia Capitolina and its surroundings, administrative centers, main roads, and the Judean countryside. Additionally, immigrants from neighboring provinces like Syria, Phoenicia, and Arabia made their way to the region and settled. Villages in the direct vicinity of Jerusalem were all depopulated, and arable land that was owned by Jews confiscated. To address these vacant villages, Roman and later Byzantine authorities initiated the construction of estate farms and monasteries, benefiting the nobles and the church. The rural areas around Aelia Capitolina underwent a process of Romanization, with evidence of Roman citizens and veterans settling there during the late Roman period. Evidence of Roman veteran settlement can be found throughout Judea proper, including artifacts like a marble sarcophagus depicting Dionysus in Turmus Aya, Latin-inscribed stones at Girbet Dibna, a Minerva statue at Girbat al-Mafyar, a centurion's tomb at Beit Natif, and a Roman mansion with Western elements near Beit Guvrin. Now, the enslavement of Roman, rather Jewish captives was very widespread, with sources indicating that there were very great many of them sold into slavery all across the empire. A chronicle from the 7th century states that Jewish captives were sold for the price of one ration of food for a horse, suggesting such a flood of new slaves in the market that supply and demand had simply made them so cheap. Captives who were not sold were deported to various locations, contributing significantly to the Jewish diaspora. Following the suppression of the Bar Kokhba revolt, Hadrian enacted a series of religious decrees aimed at extinguishing Jewish nationalism in Judea. He banned Torah law and the Hebrew calendar. He also executed many Jewish scholars. And he wasn't done there. The sacred scrolls of Judaism were ceremonially burnt at the temple complex he constructed on the Temple Mount, where statues of Jupiter and himself were installed instead. These measures remained in force until Hadrian's death in 138, which brought at least a little bit of relief to the surviving Jewish communities. Additionally, the Romans imposed a lasting punishment by attempting to erase the memory of Judea or ancient Israel. They dropped the name Judea from the provincial title, renaming the province Judea as Syria Palestina. This move was unprecedented, as rebellions had never before resulted in expunging of a nation's name. Furthermore, in an effort to ensure the prosperity of the newly established Roman colony of Aelia Capitolina, Jews were prohibited from entering except on the day of Tisha B'Av. By severing the association of Jews with Judea and forbidding them to practice Judaism, Hadrian sought to eradicate a nation that had inflicted significant casualties on the Roman Empire. And that's the end of the story for the Second Roman-Jewish War, or the Jewish-Roman War, whichever side you're on. But like any other page of history, it's just another way of looking at it in a detached manner. Well, it was interesting, to say the least, wasn't it? I hope you learned something. I hope you enjoyed yourself and managed to relax as we go through the old world. I'd like to thank my Mega Chad tier patron, Stark Factory, who is a complete and utter Chad, making a great contribution to the channel. If you would like to make a contribution, you need only follow the links to the Patreon, which are supplied in the comments and description. Otherwise, you can just enjoy the videos in whichever way you see fit. Well, with that, thank you very much for listening again. I've been your guide for this evening. Wherever you are in the world, look after yourself and those around you, and don't forget to drink plenty of water. I'll see you in the next video. Good night, everyone.